There is no discussion at this point. The only thing lying between us and you are the days, the nights, and the battlefield. That's what the leader of Hezbollah recently said after the Israeli strike on Beirut that took place this week. Of course, Hezbollah is also not happy about the Israeli strike on Iranian territory that ended up killing the political chief of Hamas. These are a couple of the things that we're going to be talking about at this live stream for today. Basically, Western-backed terrorism across the world and the hypocrisy of it, really. Because, of course, the West has long waged its own war on so-called terror for a long time, since George W. Bush, and everyone since then. So we're going to be talking a bit about that, the recent manifestations of this Western-backed terrorism, this Western-funded terrorism, Western-supported terrorism. And I just want to say thank you all for joining us. Welcome to the Revolution Report, this week's live stream. As you can see behind me, the background where I do these live streams has changed up a bit because I'm actually in the United States right now. I'm going to be here for the rest of the year. So that'll give me a bit of an opportunity to cover some communist political happenings here in the United States. I've already got some plans lined up, so I'm going to be doing some shorts, a documentary video, and covering stuff going on in the United States around the elections and with the emergence of the American Communist Party as well. I am working on my laptop now. I don't usually stream on this, so if there's any problems with the audio, the video, make sure to let me know in the chat and I'll try to work it out, okay? And if you don't already follow us on Discord, Instagram, Twitter, look at our website, you should definitely check that stuff out, TheRevolutionReport.org and The Revolution Report on all different social media platforms. We post a lot of interesting stuff there. Follow us on Telegram as well. We've got news there. Pretty much every day, a number of posts as well. So, well, since this is a live stream dedicated to investigating Western-backed terror around the world, specifically right now in the Middle East and Venezuela, because those are the two areas where we're seeing it really come to a head, and we're seeing the sort of consequences of the West's actions, of the West's funding and supporting of terrorist acts and violence all around the world. And I want to start with the Palestinian genocide that's going on right now, because essentially the United States' support for Israel is the largest example of support for terrorism that's going on in the world right now. Today marks 300 days since Tel Aviv launched its recent genocidal campaign against Gaza following the events of October 7th. Nearly the entire population of Gaza has been displaced, essentially, at this point, according to Press TV. Nearly 40,000 Palestinians have been killed since the beginning of this campaign, according to the Gazan Health Ministry. There's also very likely many more bodies that have still not been recovered. They're still under the rubble. They have yet to be found as a result of this horrific, barbaric attack on the Palestinian people. And nearly 16,000 of that casualty statistic that I just mentioned were children. 16,000 children killed by Israel's attack on Gaza. The Israelis, on top of that, have committed countless massacres. I mean, there's a huge long list of them that you can find with an easy Google search. I mean, just to name a few, of course, we've got the World Central Kitchen massacre that got a lot of attention because Westerners were involved. The Al Nasser Hospital massacre and the Rafah tent massacre. I mean, there's tons of others you can find very easily on the internet. And on top of that, on top of these massacres, on top of the massacre of children, the relentless killing of civilians, Israelis have also shamelessly, publicly humiliated prisoners, abused civilians, and blatantly disregarded human rights. in videos that you can find all over the internet. This is something that's been going on for a while, obviously. We've seen videos like this even before Israel launched this genocidal campaign in Gaza, but this most recent campaign has come up with a lot of abuse across the internet. And all the while, per the theme of this live stream, Washington has given Tel Aviv a blank check so that it's literally getting away with whatever it wants to. It's getting away with genocide in the modern world. We recently posted a video on the channel, The Revolution Report. Jeff Monson, the famous international heavyweight fighter, and now he's a Russian politician. He made a video on the plight of the Gazan people. It's one of the tragedies going on in the world that's quite close to Jeff's heart. That and the Ukraine conflict and the plight of the Donbass people. So you should definitely check out that video on our YouTube channel. It's gotten over 15,000 views now, so it's definitely an interesting one. You should check it out. But as I mentioned about this blank check that essentially Washington has given Tel Aviv to do whatever it wants to get away with genocide, yesterday an emergency meeting was held of the UN Security Council. This was called by Iran, and it was an initiative supported by Russia, China, and Algeria. And of course, Palestine's representative had an opportunity to speak at this emergency meeting. And she said some really important words that need to be heard that are kind of obvious for anyone who's really been paying attention to what's been going on in the conflict. But obviously, this is something that's not so obvious to many people in the West that are living in countries that have media that are dominated by the pro-Israeli narrative. She said that Israel has no red lines. No red lines. And its politicians really believe that they can get away with whatever they want without any sort of consequences. And everything that Israel's done up to this point, especially throughout this latest campaign, has proven just that they feel that they can get away with whatever they want. And the U.S. will protect them. Whatever they want. Israel also spoke at this emergency meeting, and essentially what it said was it just blamed Iran for everything, as it usually does, calling Iran the terrorists, and tried to gain essentially sympathy for the children who were killed in the strike on Golan Heights on Israeli-occupied territory. Not to mention, of course, there was no mention by the Israeli side of the statistic I just mentioned, right? The 16,000 children that were killed since the beginning of this campaign. And Israel, spoke a little bit about a lot of things. I mean, the number of back and forth attacks there have been recently, because, of course, Israel accuses Hezbollah of having bombed the Golan Heights that led to the deaths of a bunch of children. This is something that Hezbollah denies even carrying out. Hezbollah said that if it had carried out an attack like this, it would have taken responsibility for it. But the leader of Hezbollah is saying actually that it's really Israel that was probably responsible for this, and it probably in the form of an accident. And when they found out that a bunch of children had died, they'd used it for they saw that they could use it as a political justification to carry out the attack that they carried out in Iran, which is exactly the justification they used for the killing of the Hamas political chief in Iran, on Iranian soil. A blatant violation of Iran's territorial integrity and sovereignty, when Israel is always talking about how it's the only democracy in the Middle East. Everything it does is in defense of itself, and it doesn't violate international law, right? Israel even claimed that the attack on Iranian territory that killed the Hamas leader was an act of self-defense. I mean, how brainwashed do you have to be to believe that would be an act of self-defense? Iran accuses the United States of being complicit in this attack, even though the United States says that it didn't have anything to do with Israel's attack on Iranian territory. But Iran still holds the U.S. accountable, and rightly so, because it's the U.S. that's given Israel this blank check to do whatever it wants, as I mentioned earlier in the live stream, and thereby the U.S. has the responsibility for the actions of Israel, for their blatant disregard for international law. I mean, this is something that was held up by the International Court of Justice, saying that Israel's settlements are illegal and that it's expanding. It's got an imperialist expansionist ideology. And whenever this stuff comes out, Israel says that the UN is anti-Semitic. Everyone who disagrees with Israel is just anti-Semitic. That's the real logic behind the sort of arguments that Israel puts forward when it's criticized for anything worthy of criticism, really. I mean, what about the fact that Israel is not a signatory to the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Pact, and it's got nuclear weapons? Everyone pretty much knows about it. And yet we call North Korea a rogue state, right? The Palestinian representative at this UN meeting called Israel a rogue state, and that could not be closer to the truth. That could not be closer to the truth. The biggest rogue state in the world right now is Israel, based on what it's doing in Gaza, based on the way it just completely disregards all sort of international norms. And nobody can do anything about it because the United States has the most well-funded military in the world. And if anyone threatens to respond, American aircraft carriers show up at their door. So again, like I said, this strike on Golan Heights that killed a bunch of children, this is something that Israel accuses Hezbollah of carrying out, that Hezbollah says, we didn't do that. And in response, Israel hit Beirut and killed a Hezbollah leader, killed an Iranian military advisor there. And, you know, this is something that Hezbollah has vowed revenge. And Iran has also vowed revenge for the killing of this Hamas political chief on Iranian territory. They've raised the flag of revenge in Tehran. Both countries have vowed to seek revenge in the way they see fit against Israel for these hostile acts that Israel somehow believes that people should consider to be an act of self-defense, right? Specifically in terms of the statement that was released, the chief of Hezbollah said that Israel had crossed red lines. The red lines that Israel doesn't think it has, essentially. And that everyone must expect, quote, rage and revenge on all the fronts supporting Gaza. So obviously there's going to be some sort of reaction by Hezbollah. Hopefully, obviously, this doesn't develop into a more regional war. This is something that Russia also talked about at the UN meeting, saying that this assassination of the Hamas chief in Iran completely undermined any sort of possibility for the Palestinian conflict to be resolved through negotiations, right? And it's a complete violation of international law. Everyone knows it, but you know what can be done about it when the United States toes this Israeli line? It's all geopolitical. It doesn't have to do with what's right and wrong. The United States just wants to dominate the world's markets and cripple the Middle East as an independent force in the world. So we're going to have to see what is going to come out of that. Is going to come out of the Hezbollah response, the Iranian response, because it really looks like negotiations that have been tried for the longest time. The two-state solution that the United Nations and most countries in the world are still trying to force Israel to abide by, even though the Israeli government completely rejects the two-state solution and says they're not going to abide by it, and there's nobody that can force them to. It looks like negotiations really have failed to yield anything. I mean, it really looks like in the case of Palestine and the Middle East, the only sort of solution there's going to be support for the axis of resistance, support for all peoples struggling for national liberation, regardless of the character of how they're doing it. I mean, every nation that is nationally oppressed, that is not allowed to have its own nationhood, has the right to national liberation. It's as simple as that. And support for the emerging multipolar world. where people are actually, where countries are actually going to be treated as equals, among equals, rather than treated as patron states or chess pieces in a geopolitical game from the imperialist center of finance capital in the West. But of course, the Middle East isn't the only place where what we're talking about here is relevant. Of course, recently there were the Venezuelan elections that took place. And that was something that has garnered a lot of attention around the world. We've seen a lot of news reports done about it in Telesur. A lot of our comrades in the United States actually went as election observers and witnessed that with their own eyes. Carlos from Midwestern Marks was there as an election observer. You can actually watch his recent live stream for more info about that was on Midwestern Marks not so long ago. I think maybe even an hour ago it finished. Jackson Hinkle was also there, who had to get a special security detail from the government because the opposition was doxing him and calling for people to kill him. Okay? All of these people face the threat of fascist violence. Election observers, right? People who are supposed to observe the elections to make sure that they're fair, essentially. And the Western-backed opposition is trying to stifle these people that are going there for that are going to observe the elections. Because, of course, they want their own elections where they're going to win, whether they're fair or not. Maduro won with 51% of the vote. And the West has still not recognized this election. And they're supporting these violent protests across the country, even though Maduro has even called on the Supreme Court to investigate and verify the results of this election, because he's confident that they're legitimate. This is the will of the people. It's not like Maduro won 99.9% of the vote. He won with 51% of the vote. The opposition had around 44%. They had a competitive election, and the United Socialist, the PSUV of Venezuela, it won the election fair and square. That's despite cyber attacks. That's despite destruction of electoral records by the opposition as well. I mean, so much stuff went down during this election to try and stifle the socialist democracy that's been constructed in Venezuela. So much has been done by forces that have support from throughout the West, from outside the country in question, and still a fair election was able to be held, and Maduro won fair and square, over 51% of the vote. If you guys want to learn more about the sort of sabotage that went into the elections, the attempted election sabotage by the opposition, and also hear a bit about probably one of the most important speeches that Maduro ever made, our very own correspondent, Alvaro Enrique Saldivia Lopez. I usually just call him Alvaro. I didn't know his whole name, actually. I knew Lopez, but his middle name, Enrique Saldivia, that's cool. He's our very own correspondent. He was one of the election observers there in Venezuela. And he witnessed this sabotage, or attempted sabotage, rather, of the elections. And he also was there throughout the whole election process. He wrote an article about that on our website that you can check out. The link in the chat that should be there. And that's a really interesting article. We've got him on the ground there. And I'm going to be talking about a little work he did a bit earlier later on in this live stream, because it's also relevant to this whole situation. And in terms of, again, Western meddling into this situation, right? Already the Organization for American States, which is basically a U.S. puppet organization of Latin American states, has already said it's analyzing the situation in Venezuela. And we've seen reactions from Cuba and Mexico saying, let's step back from analyzing and let Venezuela handle its own internal politics by itself, because this organization has a long track record of analyzing and then supporting some sort of violent U.S.-backed coup in a Latin American country, which is something that Mexico and Cuba, who have obviously left-wing governments, do not want to see happen. So that organization has been criticized and warned against getting involved. Now, in terms of the opposition that that has been essentially rioting in Venezuela and doxing people and trying to kill people and has been beating people up, right? I mean, Maduro said that the comanditos, that they're being called, have attacked over 3,600 activists from the United Socialist Party of Venezuela, the PSUV. Maduro has promised that he's not going to allow a civil war to break out, but we have to be clear about who these opposition people are. I mean, Maduro placed the blame, of course, for this election violence on his election opponent who won around 44% of the vote. But these are fascist groups, U.S.-supported fascist organizations in the country that are completely anti-socialist, that have ties to Western-funded, Western-supported fascist organizations in the country that would like to see essentially a fascist overthrow of the government, not through the organs of democracy, which of course they can't win through, but a sort of violent fascist coup of the government, the likes of which we saw in Bolivia, right? If you guys remember that. And they're actually mobilizing drug addicts and minors for this violence. This is something that the authorities were able to confirm, okay? It's been confirmed that these fascist groups are mobilizing minors and drug addicts to commit this political violence against the Venezuelan government. And the interesting thing is that the mainstream media, when it talks about Venezuela, it only talks about Venezuela when the U.S. is trying to cause trouble there, essentially, right? We saw how much Venezuela was in the media under the Trump administration when they were trying to literally install Juan Guaido into power, who couldn't win the election, trying to undemocratically install a dictator into power. And obviously now Venezuela is back in the media, in the mainstream media, because there's chaos going on there right now surrounding the elections. Because obviously the West knows that election time can be vulnerable for socialist governments, specifically in Venezuela in this case, and they choose to support the opposition and their politically motivated violence there. But you know when there's not talk about Venezuela in the mainstream media? There's not talk about Venezuela most of the time. Because most of the time it's actually doing just fine. When the United States is not funding some sort of coup in the country or backing some sort of fascist organizations that are committing political violence in the country, Venezuela is actually doing quite well with its socialist programs, with its administration of the country, with the kind of international ties it's building with countries like Cuba, Russia, all these different multipolar countries around the world. And one of the examples of this, specifically an example for why Venezuela has not really been in the mainstream media between the Trump administration attempt to overthrow the government and right now, is because Venezuela had actually a streak of 33 straight months of economic growth between that period. 33 straight months of economic growth. When it wasn't being harassed by U.S. agents, fascists, of course it's still even under sanctions by the United States, but when it's not being harassed that critically, it's able to achieve economic miracles with its socialist programs that it's come up with. I mean, we saw 33 months of uninterrupted economic growth under Maduro's leadership in Venezuela. This is something that you can read about again from in an article that our correspondent who's in Venezuela, Alvaro, he wrote an article about this 33 months of uninterrupted growth, how they achieved it, what exactly it involved there. I'm not sure. It was written back in June, so that's 33 months of uninterrupted growth up until June of this year. Maybe that's changed as a result of the politically motivated violence this month, or maybe it hasn't. I'm not sure. But up until June of this year, a couple months ago, essentially, that was 33 months of uninterrupted economic growth. And of course, you will never hear about that in the mainstream media, about a socialist economic success. You'll only hear outlets like well, right-wing media outlets, essentially. You only hear right-wing media outlets constantly talking about how Venezuela, everyone's starving there, everyone's poor because of socialism, hyperinflation, blah, 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 blah. But they'll never talk about the achievements, the 33 months of uninterrupted growth, the fact that they were able to get, during that time, inflation under control, essentially. And things were improving. But again, now they're facing another wave of U.S.-backed, Western-backed violence against the legitimate socialist government of the country. And that's stuff you'll never hear about in the mainstream media or in these right-wing media outlets. So, you know, the main thing that I think can be taken away from these recent examples, but also from the many examples there are of Western-funded terrorism around the world, Western-funded violence. Of course, you know, we didn't even mention in this video the fact that Ukraine is being supplied by the United States with long-range weapons, and it's hitting targets inside the Russian Federation, killing civilians, being helped by U.S. satellites, U.S. specialists guiding the drones and missiles that the Ukrainian military is using from the United States. We're not even talking about that. That's a whole other story in itself. We've talked about it before. But the main conclusion to be drawn here, really, after understanding how many instances there really are of Western imperialism supporting terrorist acts around the world, is that it's completely hypocritical. It's completely hypocritical for them to do this and then accuse everyone else that they don't like of being part of an axis of evil or being literally fascist, right? The U.S. has tried to turn the whole world against Russia. They've launched more sanctions against Russia than any other country in the entire world for its anti-NATO military operation in Ukraine. Right? It's tried to convince the world that Russia is fascist. That Russia is fascist. Anyone who lives in Russia or is familiar with the country, that would sound really ridiculous to. It's not fascist at all. And yet, Israel's genocide, right, that's supported by the United States, that's given a blank check by the United States, it's seen 4 times as many civilian casualties in less than a year. In 300 days, today being the 300th day of this recent campaign, it's seen 4 times more civilian casualties than the total civilian casualties we've seen in the entire Ukraine conflict since it began, right? That's going all the way back to 2014, okay? Around 4 times as many civilian casualties in less than 1 year, as opposed to a conflict that's been going on for already 10 years. There's obviously something going on here, and yet Russia is the fascist aggressor that's brutally murdering civilians, has no regard for civilian infrastructure or anything like that, even though the Russian government and military administration has made it clear that they're only targeting military infrastructure. They're the bad guys, right? But Israel, which is slaughtering civilians left and right and knows it can get away with it, knows there are going to be no consequences. It's got officials, military officials, that have literally said that they have no disregard for Arabs, that they want to get rid of the Palestinians. I mean, Israel is literally a fascist ethno-state that has been displacing and killing civilians for decades. And they get a free pass, but Russia is a fascist country? It's absolutely ridiculous. But like I said, I don't think that a diplomatic solution is any more possible because of the fact that Israel really is a fascist ethno-state, an imperialist, colonial, fascist ethno-state that thinks it can get away with whatever it wants. And as long as it has the U.S.'s backing, it will get away with whatever it wants. And I promise you, Israel may very well end up sparking a larger regional war, and Israel and the U.S. are going to end up blaming Iran, even though it's the United States backing Israel that is really the ultimate cause of this. And that's why I, on that point, completely agree with Iran in accusing the United States of having complete complicity in this. Even though they didn't help organize the actual attack on the Hamas political chief. I mean, they deny having anything to do with it, but we don't really know. But even if that's true, right, the whole blank check that they've given Israel has made them just as culpable as the Israeli occupiers themselves. So it's obviously a sad situation, comrades. Not really sure how that's going to be resolved by anything other than the struggle of ham sandwiches in Gaza, the struggle against imperialism by the axis of resistance and the multipolar world. Negotiations have failed, and they failed for a very long time, especially because there's one party that, emboldened by the fact that it knows it can get away with whatever it wants to get away with, is completely disregarding all of the negotiating points, specifically the two-state solution that is completely, not feasible under the current conditions. And the politicians who continue to call for the two-state solution, or for Israel to abide by this two-state solution. I mean, I get they want Israel to abide by it, but that's not going to happen. But Slava, as you said in the chat, that's true. I believe the axis of resistance will win. We'll support the axis of resistance with our media information war activities on this side of the barricades from within the belly of the beast in the United States and the Western Empire. Welsh Republic Podcast, I want to say thank you for your donation. I really appreciate it. Thank you for supporting the channel. And thank you to all of our comrades on Patreon who also support the channel. We really appreciate that. You can also, if you want, support the channel through one-time donations on our website. We also have that option now. We're still working on putting up a monthly subscriber portal there, but if you'd like, you can give us a donation once a month. Just continue to go there. It helps us out a lot with our day-to-day costs for the website and equipment and everything, so we'd really appreciate that. But comrades, that's the end of the broadcast here about the unfortunate killing of the Hamas political chief in Iran, the unfortunate deaths that are continuing to result from this conflict, which, of course, Israel is responsible for, and the United States for its support of that. Our tax dollars are going to. But like Slava said in the chat, I'm an optimist. I believe that we're going to win. And I believe that comrades, workers of the world, will unite. And until then, see you on the next episode. Bye-bye.